All right, everybody, I should be live. So if I am and you can hear and see me, please let me know in the chat and we can get everything started tonight to discuss everything that's going on right now regarding this Middle East conflict, which unfortunately I feel the U.S. is about to enter. So I do want to go ahead and get into it because there's a lot of information to go over and things are happening very quickly and we need to stay on top of it because information's changing so fast. It's hard for me to actually even schedule these live streams at this point in time with a topic in mind because so much is happening so quickly. I have to suddenly change it in order for it to still be relevant. So I do have people in the chat I want to say hello to. We have ND Prepper 87. Always good to see you, brother. I appreciate it. And this is one of my local community members, and I hope that you're networking with local community members as well, because it is who we're going to rely on if things ever fall apart. Harbor Prepper, good to see you. Shadow Prepper with the 5x5.56, and we have Derek coming in with the 5x5 as well. So I do believe that we are good to go and get things started here. Robert P with the 45x45, because it's what God would want. Now, throw 8 by chocolate chip cookies in Indiana. I don't even know what to say about that. Let's get talking about some of the crazy stuff that's happening right now, okay? I want to go ahead and just verify and relate this information to you really quickly that, I mean, I'm not anybody special and I don't have inside information. So what we're talking about tonight is the information that we currently have access to. And we're going to speculate on a couple things based on historical precedent and talk about, first, what's happening regarding this Iranian strike that's imminent, which hasn't necessarily occurred yet. So I'm still kind of waiting to see what happens there because this is something that they particularly broadcasted. We're also going to talk about the current scenario unfolding right before our eyes. And then we're going to move into all of the evidence that supports the reasoning to believe that the U.S. is getting ready to be involved in this war directly. So lots of things to discuss. And here we go. And we're just going to start with a quick overview. I went with CNBC on this one just because it had a little bit more of a moderate bias in the sense of being a little more center, let's just say. But it does a good job of just keeping things updated. So we have one of the most recent updates from 15 minutes ago saying airports are closed across the Middle East, stranding tens of thousands. Nothing super important there, but something to be aware of. Now, this just happened, okay? So first, we'll just jump over here. The White House says Trump is leaving the G7 meeting in Canada to focus on the Middle East. Trump plans to leave the G7 summit in Western Canada early to return to Washington and focus on the situation in the Middle East, the White House said tonight. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement that Trump was returning so he can attend to many important matters. President Trump had a great day at the G7, even signing a major trade deal with the UK and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Much was accomplished, but because of what's going on in the Middle East, President Trump will be leaving tonight after dinner with heads of state. And this was after Trump told Tehran to evacuate, which was extremely alarming because this is a city of over 10 million people in Iran, and it definitely has people speculating and wondering why the President of the United States would advise 10 million people evacuate a major metropolitan area, right? Because this is obviously chaotic and panic-inducing, and it also makes you wonder why. What's the purpose behind this directive, and what information does he have access to that would make him want to warn those people about what may or may not be happening here in the near future, right? Criticizing Iran's leadership for failing to quickly agree to limitations on its nuclear ambitions, Trump today urged Tehran residents to immediately evacuate. What a shame and waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran, Trump wrote on Truth Social. It would likely be logistically complicated for Tehran, a city of nearly 10 million people, to evacuate. Since Israel's strikes on the country began, airports in Iran and across the Middle East have been closed and many roads have been blocked. Exactly. But this is still a very striking development because to have the President of the United States basically just tell a city of people to evacuate is concerning, right? Now, I wanted to share that with you first to go back up here to let you know just how escalatory the situation has become. Trump has asked the National Security Council to be prepared in the Situation Room when he returns from the G7 summit, a U.S. official told NBC News. Trump is cutting short his attendance at the Group of Seven summit in Canada because of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, the White House said this evening. Now, there was some interesting controversy there at the G7, including him saying that Russia should never have been disinvited and it should still be the G8 summit and all these different types of things. But regardless of anything that occurred there, especially regarding trade deals with the UK and such, The sudden departure is the actual concerning situation involving the G7 summit, because usually the president would have just stayed for the majority of the summit and been there to have further discussions, especially in such a chaotic period of time. Now, we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of interesting things just to kind of show that even more is happening than what we necessarily know about or expect, okay? So, first off, let me get rid of this particular screen. And let's talk about what Iran recently said that, well, first off, helped describe the title of this live stream, but second off, is raising, alarm bells for why all these sudden movements have happened from the U.S. regarding Israel, and with Iran's retaliation strikes continuing. Real quick, I'll jump back in the chat for a second here. What's up, David Baise? Good to see you. Wildcards Rex. Hey, Magic, made it to the live. Well, I'm glad you made it, and I always like seeing your avatar because scout troopers are the best kind of troopers. We all know it. Let's see here. Maggie B with the upside down face. I feel that very, very centrally to my my system. What does that even mean? What am I, a robot? Anyway, let's see here. No war, says Patriot Zero. I mean, I agree. And just to kind of let everybody know my thought process here, I don't want us to be involved in another war in the Middle East. I don't want us to be involved in any war if at all possible. And if we're involved in a war, it should be because of the actions of another country that went against our will or national security in some form or fashion, but not with the intention of getting involved in a war, if you know what I'm trying to say. So I have my concerns. I'm not very excited about everything that's going on. We have Gigabliga reporting, which is excellent. I'm glad you're here. We also have Northwest Montana representing from Hillbill. Very awesome to see you as well. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what Iran just let everybody know, which is maybe why some of these recent movements are occurring. Iran preparing for largest missile attack Israel has ever seen, says state media. This is from today. All this information is happening now, so it's hard to stay on top of it, which is why I'm trying to get through it in case any additional updates occur. And as of my last understanding is that the recent missile barrage on Israel was nowhere near the largest Israel has ever seen, so that's why we're still waiting for this potential attack to occur. The warning came shortly after the Israeli Air Force bombed the office of Iran's state broadcaster IRIB in Tehran. And in case you haven't seen that, what happened there is basically the broadcast station was hit during a live news broadcast, and somebody lost their life, but at the same time, you could see the damage and the sudden shock of the strike occurring live on Iranian television. So it was very shocking. As tensions continue to flare between Iran and Israel, Tehran on Monday warned that it's preparing for the largest and most intense missile attack in history on Israeli soil, Iranian state media reported. The warning came shortly after the Israeli Air Force bombed the office of Iran's state broadcaster IRIB in Tehran. The strike was captured during a live show at IRIB offices in the Iranian capital. The attack on the state broadcaster came after Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated that Tel Aviv will make Iranian propaganda disappear. The Iranian propaganda incitement mouthpiece is on its way to disappear, Katz was quoted as saying. Katz also warned Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, saying that Israel will strike everywhere against the Iranian dictator. So right now, Iran is very well aware publicly of the fact that their media is going to be targeted directly and their leadership is going to be targeted directly, which of course can easily lead into extreme escalation. Now, there's another side of this situation that's very concerning, which is why some of these recent movements might be occurring, because we also have foreign countries getting involved in what you could possibly perceive as a nuclear way. So, just to jump back in the chat here for a minute, Fake Player says, heard DJT called security meeting about a half hour ago. So I haven't heard that quite yet, but there's so much happening, like I said, that I'm trying to stay well-rounded with the information, and it's hard to just stay on top of every little movement that's occurring. But I don't doubt it, because things are, title of this live stream, I literally added things are happening fast 20 minutes ago, because as I was prepping for the live stream and just making sure that I had all my notes and everything together, things just kept evolving and changing. So I was like, this is maybe something that we can't just stay on top of easily. So we need to be aware of that as things evolve very quickly. Let's see here. Kevin Brown says, gives new meaning to broadcaster. Indeed it does, Kevin. Indeed it does. Okay. Oath Taker 276 says it was only shocking if you were there. And the imagery can still be shocking even if you're not there, right? So I think we can all agree on that. But I totally understand what you're saying in the sense of the difference of seeing it happen and being there when it happens. So let's go ahead and talk about this I would call this an escalation, but I don't necessarily know how this would look. But this is Pakistan. And maybe this is why we have certain aircraft in the sky right now. This is maybe why we've seen all this aircraft movement lately and why the U.S. is starting to beef things up in that region, because we also have information like this coming out from countries like Pakistan. Pakistan will nuke Israel if it uses nuclear weapon against U.S., claims Iran. Okay. Mohsen Rezaei's remarks come during an interview on the Iranian state television as a barrage of missiles crisscrossed Iran and Israel. Tehran, Pakistan will launch a nuclear attack on Israel if it drops a nuclear bomb in Iran. A top Iranian officer of its elite forces has claimed amid rising tensions in the Middle East. General Mohsen Rezaei's remarks came during an interview on Iranian television as a barrage of missiles crisscrossed Iran and Israel. So far, about 248 deaths, Iran 230 and Israel 18, have been reported in the two countries. Pakistan has assured us that if Israel uses a nuclear bomb on Iran, they will attack Israel with a nuclear bomb, said Rezaei, a senior official or a senior officer in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and a member of Iran's National Security Council. Officials in Pakistan have denied the claim. NDTV could not independently verify the video. Israel and Pakistan are among the 9 countries that currently possess nuclear weapons, according to ICANN. Pakistan has vowed to stand behind Iran and called on the Muslim world to unite, Rezaei said, pointing to a bonhomie that follows an ugly missile exchange between the two countries in early 2024. He also claimed that Tehran has hidden capabilities that are yet to be revealed to the world, which I think is highly likely, but many seem to not. And in case, I don't know if you guys follow me on X or not, but I just mentioned something earlier today, how, of course, rhetoric is flying in all directions, and conversations are currently heated because of the level of risk involved with everything going on right now. But it is interesting to me that people will say one thing based on official sources and then say something else saying that because these official sources are clearly lying, this is not true, right? So I feel like you have to decide if it's one or the other, or you have to just be open to the idea that both could be wrong or both could be true. And I think that's how you make a more well-rounded perspective. But it is odd how many people will be out there saying, it's proven for a fact that Iran doesn't have any of these weapons of mass destruction, which you can't 100% prove. It just means that we're not aware of them. But then to go ahead and say that, well, all these official reports and everything else aren't necessarily true, because we know they lie. So I'm not exactly sure how that aligns with somebody's thought process, but that's what I see a lot happening on X lately, which is why I had to mention it, because it was bothering me. Now, let's go ahead and jump in over here. Let's see. McMillan Master says this is going to get stupid. And I have a feeling you're right, unfortunately, because we are in a situation right now where our country has a very high likelihood of getting dragged into this, even if we don't want to be. Even if the people in charge don't want to be. There's something else that I have to keep in mind. This is something that I want to be aware of as things evolve, because I can't be so rigid in every single belief or understanding that I have to not understand how things work to a certain degree. And there is a level, regardless of whether or not I agree with it or not, where if you do have an alliance with another country and that other country ends up in a situation involving a war that could threaten their existence, then what is the value of an alliance if you're not willing to partake in the defense of said country, right? But then at the same time, by knowing that gives countries the power to leverage said alliance by forcing something to occur that would then make the country with the larger amount of resources react, right? So like I understand all sides of it, but I'm also concerned about how that could be used based on that information, right? So there's a lot of things happening all at once. What's up, Goshen Prepping? Good to see you. Glad you're here. And there's a lot of good people here in the chat tonight, but a lot of things are happening fast, and I just want to make sure we're on top of it. And I'm going to go ahead and just double check to make sure I haven't had any recent updates come through that are, falling apart really quickly. Trump just recently said, I have to be back early for obvious reasons in regards to him leaving the G7 summit. We had just a really great relationship with everybody, and it's really nice. I wish I could stay for tomorrow, but they understand this is big stuff. The president requested the National Security Council to be ready in the Situation Room. So that's where we're at right now regarding those movements, okay? Now here's some other indications that things are about to get much worse over there, and things are going to spiral a little bit out of control, which I think once we have foreign nations starting to withdraw from countries, there's a level of concern there that maybe things are that they're aware of things that we aren't quite yet, right? So first we have India starting to evacuate students from Iran. Okay, so amid escalating Israel-Iran airstrikes, the Indian government is relocating Indian students within Iran for their safety. Approximately 600 students have been moved to Qom from Tehran, a target of Israeli strikes, while 110 students from Urmia are near the Armenian border awaiting evacuation. External Affairs Minister Jashankar is actively engaged with regional counterparts to address the situation. Okay, there are roughly 10,000 Indians in Iran, out of whom 6,000 are students. So they're already evacuating Indians from Iran because of the current situation. And then we also have evidence of the same thing happening regarding Israel and other foreign nations that are also nuclear superpowers. China, the Chinese embassy in Israel urges citizens to leave. Okay, and the Chinese embassy in Israel has urged Chinese citizens to return home or leave the country via land border crossings as soon as possible, on grounds that the security situation has deteriorated and Israeli airspace remained closed. At present, the Israeli-Iranian conflict continues to escalate, with civilian facilities damaged and civilian casualties increasing, making the security situation even more severe, the embassy warned in a Tuesday notice on WeChat. So China is bailing people out of Israel. India is bailing people out of Iran. These obviously well-connected economic nuclear superpowers, right? There's only so many in the world, India and China being two of them, seem to be aware of the fact that things are going to get worse, or else they wouldn't be putting the resources towards relocating and evacuating their citizenry from these areas of concern. So we are going to talk about some additional things here in just a second. Let's see. Rob Sinelli says Trump has lost it, dunking on Tucker Carlson. I think what we found over the years, and especially here in recent times, is that things are said very quickly and rashly, and then usually, let's just say, mended quickly thereafter, right? I think we realized that here recently with the Elon Musk and Donald Trump spat. So not saying that that's okay or reasonable or something we should be expecting, but it is something that I see happen quite often here recently, and I think it's not surprising based on the current circumstances, and I have a feeling it will be remedied at some point in time. So let's see here. Vault Tech Prepper, I read that. I'm not going to say it just because it's too funny and I might not be able to get through it. Let's see. John Schneebly says the First Amendment is backed up by the Second Amendment. I agree. And I think people, especially those who are so concerned right now with what's happening in the country, that they're out protesting and doing all these things, especially in regards to not being aligned with tyranny, should understand why the Second Amendment is so important. Even if we don't agree on a lot of our political ideologies or things of that nature, the minimum thing we should agree on is like, yeah, we need the Second Amendment though, because right, tyranny is a real concern, according to you and according to me. So there you go. We can finally agree on something. I don't know why we haven't figured that out yet. So, okay, we also have Gen X Gemini here, just letting everyone know that I shouldn't lie to my viewers because not everybody's good people, all right? Including them, apparently. So, more to come, but we have very interesting escalating situations occurring almost like on a minute-by-minute basis right now. And that's something that I don't necessarily know how to properly stay on top of because the news is ever evolving. Every time I change over to a different news outlet or to a different live feed, I get additional information that wasn't there before. And it just seems to be getting worse. Pete Hegseth just said that the U.S. forces are posturing defensively in the Middle East to be strong in pursuit of a peace deal. So keep that in mind. Defensively doesn't mean that they're not going to react and doesn't mean that they're not going to be used in a way to prevent an attack or to respond to one. It just sounds better optically to say you're there for defensive purposes rather than just saying you're there to be on the offense. How could you technically send, let's just say, I don't know, another aircraft carrier to the Middle East and say, well, we're sending it there offensively to attack, right? You can't say that unless you declare war on a country, which you can't do without congressional recognition. So here we are saying these things just to make everybody feel better, but it's not where we're at. Now, the ADF, or the IDF says there's a new wave of missiles headed toward Israel right now. A new wave of missiles was detected heading toward Israel from Iran, the Israeli Defense Forces said. A short time ago, alerts were activated in several areas of the country following the discovery of missiles launched from Iran into the territory. Hold on, I'm just going to go ahead and share this with everybody just so you guys can see it as well as we go through it. From the territory of the state of Israel, the IDF said. The public is asked to obey the Home Front Command's instructions at this time. The Air Force is working to intercept and attack wherever necessary to eliminate the threat. Intercept and attack. Not just intercept, right? But they're going to go attack these launch sites and everything else regarding their ability to launch the missiles in the first place. So this keeps escalating, of course, and it is something that's constantly changing. And you'll look at a live feed, and for 3 hours straight, nothing happens, and all of a sudden it's a barrage of rockets, right? So this is quickly developing, and it's something that we will pay attention to or keep our eyes on throughout the live stream tonight to make sure there's no breaking developments. But I also want to make sure that we all agree that we don't. I don't think we want this, right? Like, we don't want to go to another war in the Middle East. I personally don't. And the thing is, like, back in the early 2000s, I was still in high school at the time, but I just remember feeling very patriotic about everything occurring at that time, and then watching all the things regarding Operation Iraqi Freedom and all these other things occur, and then realizing the older I got that these things were not necessarily done in the way that we were presented, right, regarding the reasonings and justifications as to why. So I have my concerns, and I have maybe trauma scars from some of that, right? Because I'll be honest with everybody here, I've been kind of a fringe, conspiracy-oriented weirdo for a very long time, like a very long time, like before I could vote, So let's see here. Isaiah said they made up already. You know what? I bet they did. You're right, 100%. Militant roots. We're the government, and we're here to defend you. Right, exactly. And that's just kind of how this whole thing falls apart very quickly, right? So let's see. AZ Desert Rat here says, I wonder if there will be a strike on Iran tonight after Trump told people to get out of Tehran. And that's the concern and the thing that everybody's wondering. Why would the president of the United States suggest that a city of 10 million people evacuate unless there was a good reason, right? And maybe that was a heads up. Maybe it was a veiled threat to say, trust us, you don't want to be there anymore, right? But at the same time, like, it could have also been possibly a finger in Israel's eye, right? It could have possibly been Trump bypassing Israel to say, get out now, trust me, you don't want to be there. And yeah, that might not be as effective as doing something more official, but at the same time, if Israel was planning attacks there and targeting certain groups or people, they probably wouldn't want the U.S. president to tell everybody to evacuate beforehand, right? So, like, it is an interesting situation that has a lot of different possibilities there, depending on how you want to look at it. I'm not trying to make excuses or protect anybody or defend anyone. I'm just trying to present possibilities for you to consider that might be a little more obscure. So, let's go ahead and talk about some of the evidence that supports the idea that we're heading to war over there, okay? Because there's a lot of evidence for that. And there's some things we're going to talk about tonight that you're probably not going to hear other discussions about because they're a little bit further in depth than maybe what everyone's doing right now versus surface level information that's breaking news related. But it is something that I think is very good in the sense of understanding the build up towards where we're at right now and why the likelihood of us getting involved over there is very high. So, Militant Root says, I like you guys, based chat consolidated. All right, we're doing something right here. And then let's see here. We have Redwood Gunner saying, I don't want us to go back to war either, but Iran has been funding proxies, attacking us in international shipping for a while now. Playing slap hand with the proxies is not effective long term. So we're going to talk about that here in just a second, and I totally understand what you're saying. And I think that, of course, you can always justify some of these actions to a certain degree based on, historical context and relationships and everything else. But there's also the negatives of getting drawn into a prolonged war in the Middle East once again, right? So, like, there's a lot of reasons why there's hesitation, right? So let's talk about these justifications for why you should assume we're heading towards war and all the evidence that we're building up towards that exact scenario. And then we can talk about the proxy situation during this conversation, Redwood Gunner, because this is part of the equation. So first, we're going to talk about what everybody kind of probably already knows about. An armada of U.S. Air Force tankers just deployed east over the Atlantic, spurring speculation. Now, this story is from earlier today, like this morning, and things have changed even since then in the sense of additional tankers deploying and additional aircraft activity, even over our skies, involving some nuke sniffers and planes of that variety, which don't always have direct correlations with what's occurring right now, but sometimes give you an idea of just like what level of risk we're currently at or where the threat level is, right? But this is something that a lot of people paid attention to and gave us some pause for concern, right? Over 24 U.S. Air Force KC-135R and KC-46A tankers from across the United States appeared on flight tracking software yesterday evening, taking off from their bases and heading east over the Atlantic. It isn't clear if they were dragging any combat aircraft with them, but there wasn't any obvious signs of that. While tanker movements in this direction are far from abnormal, such a large, near simultaneous migration of the jets was very peculiar, especially at a time of extreme crisis in the Middle East. The exact reason for the mass deployment is unclear, although many of the potential answers would indicate a change or preparations for a potential change in the current conflict between Israel and Iran. Okay, and here's just a little image of what everyone was seeing yesterday while this tracking of these flights was going, catabolic in the sense of viral throughout different social media platforms. And it is peculiar, right? It is something that makes you wonder what's happening for all these refueling aircraft to suddenly be traveling towards the Middle East, right? Now, we have that, okay? So that's evidence number one, right? I really needed a sip of coffee. Now, let's get into number two. Really quick. Stephen Petrikowski, wars aren't meant to be won, they're meant to be continuous. Well, these days, that certainly seems to be the case, right? But there is an issue I have with that in the sense of if you are going to a war, you should plan to end it, right? Like, we don't want forever wars. And so don't go unless you're going to go. And if you're going to go, then that means catastrophic consequences, in my opinion, based on our current level of technology and what we have access to. So that's kind of where I stand on it. Like, if we're going to do it, then you just need to literally do it, or let's not at all. And my preference is not at all. So that's where I'm at. Now, let's talk about piece of evidence number two, okay, which is the fact that we just suddenly dropped peace talks with Russia and Ukraine. Now, I can't guarantee this is the reason why, but my thought process here, in which you guys can chime in the chat to let me know how you feel about it, is that right now there isn't the bandwidth for our national security apparatus to also be accommodating peace talks between these two warring nations if we're about to have active activity in Iran or Israel. If we're going to be over there as part of a military operation, we can't afford the resources that are required to deal with Russia and Ukraine going through this peace talk negotiation situation. They have their own thing going that we can just let kind of continue because it just has been for so long while we focus all of our resources and all of our willpower over in this other theater. So that's where my thought process goes. That's one of the reasons why I think timing-wise, this is what's happening right now. I don't think this is a coincidental timing, right? Russian MFA claims U.S. canceled next round of embassy talks. The United States has canceled an upcoming round of talks with Russia aimed at restoring the operations of each side's diplomatic missions, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said on Monday. Officials from both countries previously met on February 27th and April 10th in Istanbul, following an earlier meeting between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Saudi Arabia. As of today, the next round of bilateral consultations aimed at resolving complications and normalizing the work of both countries' diplomatic missions has been canceled at the initiative of the American negotiators. Zakharova, I always say her name weird, said in a brief statement on the Foreign Ministry's website. We hope that the pause they haven't taken we hope the pause they have taken won't last too long, she added. Bear with me, we're getting through it, all right? I'm stumbling a little bit, I guess. Zakharova's statement came a week after Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov said the talks would take place very soon. Washington never confirmed this meeting. The U.S. State Department has not yet commented on the Russian Foreign Ministry statement about the canceled talks. So, we canceled the peace talks. Like, at least put them on hold or put them on pause, right? which to me is just another piece of evidence that we're heading towards war in the Middle East. We don't have the resources or the bandwidth or the time to focus on solving that problem right now, especially because it hasn't turned into a nuclear problem as of yet. So it's maybe the least of our concerns in the sense of priority versus what's happening in Israel and Iran right now. That's just the reality of the situation, right? Not my opinion per se, but based on how our military infrastructure seems to work regarding approaching conflicts. Let's see here. Jump into some good chats here real quick. We have some good info coming in from the people here. Let's see here. I can't even say this name. Disa Jikadash says Steve Bannon is right. Neocons are looking for another Iraq, and I think a lot of us feel the same way. Okay. Then we also have. Let's see here. Wouldn't it be ironic telling to other countries to stop fighting while we get in one? And maybe that's part of the reason for why they pause the talks, because how can you have peace talks while you're entering a new conflict yourself? So maybe you're right about that. I don't necessarily disagree. Let's see here. James Herrick says Pakistani nuke weapons probably have cobwebs from no maintenance. Bet they won't launch. You know what? There's definitely some speculation to that, especially regarding even some of the Soviet weapons and things of that nature. There's a good chance a lot of the nuclear weaponry that we concern ourselves with in the sense of stockpiles aren't necessarily operational. But it only takes one, right? So, it's just, I don't know if it's worth the risk of just betting on the fact that they're bad at maintenance. So that is something that I know a lot of people do consider. So here's another piece of evidence for you. And this is something that I want to approach delicately because in all honesty, I could see some people maybe getting a little bit upset about this, but I am going to back it up with some historical context to give you some ideas about some of these considerations. And it's going to fall right along the lines of what Redwood Gunner was talking about earlier regarding the proxies, okay? Let's see here. So, just check in to make sure there's no updates that we haven't heard about yet, just because things, like I said, are happening very fast. And, I just don't want to miss anything if anything crazy is going on. But currently, I'm not seeing anything immediate that I need to share with you guys, but I'm just scanning really quickly to verify that we don't have something crazy occurring. So it looks like we're good right now, so we can keep moving on. So evidence number 3, okay? This is interesting at the least, okay? Let's go ahead and start here. So this is from Media Matters, an extremely left-leaning news organization. So keep that bias in mind as we talk about this article. But there is something here that I think you should analyze and be aware of, because I think there is a little bit of truth to this particular article, and then we're going to talk about the reality of it all, and then I'm going to explain how it ties into the fact that there's more evidence here for why we're going to war over there, right? Okay, so here we go. Right-wing media weaponized Israel's strike on Iran to fearmonger about millions of jihadi sleeper cells in our country, thanks to the Democrats' open border policies. Now, first off, are there sleeper cells in the U.S.? Yes. Are they capable of wreaking havoc? Yes. We know how easy a small team can affect our infrastructure, especially regarding the power grid. So there is a lot of reason to have concern here. But this stuff is being weaponized in a different way, and I want to kind of approach it from that angle to give you something to consider, and then we're going to talk about how it ties into everything else. Okay, so first off, Media Matters was going to try to spin this like the sleeper cells like aren't real or like aren't really a threat. And that's not necessarily true either, but let's just jump into it, okay? After Israel launched airstrikes at Iranian nuclear and residential infrastructure on June 12th, right-wing media figures rushed to fearmonger that supposed democratic open border policies allowed Iranian sleeper cells into the country that might now execute terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. I think those are valid concerns, but I do think that they're being used disingenuously right now for other reasons, okay? So, some right-wing media figures have already started fear-mongering about the possibility of Iranian sleeper cells committing terrorism on U.S. soil in response to the Israeli strikes. Several have also blamed former President Joe Biden for this threat due to his alleged open border policies. The alleged part isn't alleged, it's just the way it was. So I don't know why they use that type of language, but actually I do know why. But regardless, it doesn't matter because it Anyway, right-wing figures fearmonger about the possibility of terror attacks. Like, that's the whole thing that they're trying to say here. You have Charlie Kirk here saying, keep your head on a swivel. Biden let millions of people in America. Iran might activate some sleeper cells. Stay armed, right? We had the Laura Loomer stuff coming out saying the same thing. Iranian proxies from Hamas and Hezbollah will likely retaliate on U.S. soil, and everything else regarding that. Now, here's the thing, okay? The reason I'm bringing this up is because this, to me, actually looks more like a justification for morale boost and support of an American war effort overseas in Iran, right? This is very much like, hey, let's fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. This very reminiscent of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, right, Afghanistan, and everything else occurring in the Middle East for the last 20 years. It seems like this is more so, at least in my opinion, a primer for trying to get people on board for why we need to do what we're doing, right? Which we're not doing yet, right? But this is setting the pace. And I'm just saying that this is all stuff that is coming out, and this is something I think is worth considering. That, no, I don't think it's like weaponizing it in the sense of politics, which is what this article is trying to say. But I do think there's some truth here that this is being pushed as a reasoning for why it should be okay for us to go in there and take out Iran and their proxies in the process because of all this stuff that they have planned for us here stateside. Now, that is a real threat that we need to discuss, but I do think that some of this is being used as a way to build that justification and build public support. That's just what it looks like to me based on the current scenario. Now, here's something that I want to touch base on regarding the proxy situation as well as the sleeper cell situation, okay? This is an article from 2019. It's very relevant right this second, which is why I'm sharing it, and I want you to just kind of hear me out really quickly as I go through some bullet points here. Inside Hezbollah's American sleeper cells, waiting for Iran's signal to strike U.S. and Israeli targets, right? This is from 6 years ago. Even back then, Trump was in office, right? So, like, there's some correlations here, but there's also a level of truth here regarding the sleeper cell situation. But then it also goes into how this is part 3 of evidence for why we're heading towards war, okay? If hostilities break out with the United States, Tehran may try to minimize risk to its most important assets in the Middle East by drawing on black ops units further abroad instead, okay? Now, it starts talking about everything going on in Iran at that time. This is 6 years ago, so we don't need to go through all of that. Now, let's just go ahead and jump on here. Trying to find that part that I want to start on. The context of this is that they're talking about Hezbollah, they're talking about, Hamas and all these other proxies, the Houthis and everybody else we've been hearing about for the last, few years. Now here's where it gets interesting, which is where Hezbollah's external operations apparatus, the Islamic Jihad Organization, or Unit 910, comes into play. Over the past several years, Hezbollah IJO activities have been on the rise. The uptick began in 2008 as a means of avenging the assassination of Hezbollah arch-terrorist Imad Mughniya, and later continued as a factor of Iran's shadow war with the West over Tehran's nuclear program. Hezbollah's last successful attack targeted Israeli tourists in Burgas, Bulgaria, in 2012. But a long list of other plots have since been foiled around the world, in places as far afield as Bolivia, Cyprus, Peru, Thailand, and the United Kingdom. Hezbollah pre-operational surveillance occurred in Canada, Panama, the U.S., and elsewhere. The most alarming case took place in the United States and Canada. According to U.S. prosecutors, 2 U.S.-based Hezbollah IJO operatives, Ali Karani and Samir El-Dabek, were tasked with carrying out pre-operational surveillance for potential Hezbollah attacks in the United States and Panama. Authorities allege Dabek was sent to Thailand to shut down a Hezbollah explosives lab, and that Ali Karani was directed to identify Israelis in New York who could be targeted by Hezbollah and to find people from whom he could procure arms that Hezbollah could stockpile in the area. Karani also conducted surveillance of New York and Toronto airports, as well as of FBI, Secret Service, and U.S. military facilities in New York City. Okay, so these things are real and have happened, and prosecutions have occurred regarding this type of sleeper cell activity. So we know this is a real thing that could be a problem. But here's why this is all part of the evidence regarding why there's a good chance we're about to be in a war, which I think is very, relatively obvious and forward-facing at this point. But I think building a case is important to kind of understand how much preparation has gone into it, to kind of see the investment and the perceived ROI on that investment regarding what our country is likely going to be doing. So here's where it gets interesting. and we're going to talk about the whole proxy situation that Redwood Gunner brought up earlier, okay? So, Israel's strike on Iran comes at a moment of weakness for Iran's proxies. The thing you have to keep in mind is that we have been just destroying, in tandem with Israel, we've been destroying Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas this whole time, right? The Houthis have been getting wiped. We have Hezbollah taking major hits. And of course, Hamas, I mean, Gaza barely even exists anymore. And all of this was being done over this last recent period of time to the point where now we're suddenly about to be in an entanglement with Iran directly, only after their proxies have been decimated. And that's something that I think is very, let's just say, obvious in regards to preparation of the battlefield and trying to eliminate some of these existential issues before having to take on the enemy direct. Okay, so for 4 decades, Iran poured billions of dollars, weapons, and military mines into a grand project, building up a network of anti-Israel militias in the Middle East known as the Axis of Resistance that would join Iran if a war with Israel broke out. This article, by the way, is from June 13th, 3 days ago, okay? So just keep that in mind, but I'm going to say that one more time. For 4 decades, Iran poured billions of dollars, weapons, and military mines into a grand project, building up a network of anti-Israel militias in the Middle East known as the Axis of Resistance that would join Iran if a war with Israel broke out. That war is happening right now, and their Axis of Resistance was systematically destroyed prior to all of the recent actions that we're currently witnessing. The stunning series of Israeli strikes on Iran on Friday underscored just how degraded that axis has become over the past year, with few expecting those armed groups to meaningfully respond to the Israeli aggression, experts say. And the clearest sign of that weakened stance, Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group seen as Iran's most powerful proxy, condemned the Israeli attack in a statement, but stopped short of vowing any military action in response. A notable omission from a group that has long served as the central pillar of the Axis. The Houthis in Yemen also made no mention of responding militarily in their statement condemning the Israeli attack. The Axis hasn't been fully destroyed, but it has been significantly diminished beyond the point of return, said Mahanad Haj Ali, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, Lebanon. It has been transformed into an axis of sitting ducks, waiting for the next Israeli strikes rather than taking initiative and pushing Israel into defense, as was the case just a few years ago. Israel was literally in Lebanon, wiping out Hezbollah, right? That's what they've been doing prior to all this recent action. We were striking Houthi embedments all along, Yemen in order to make the shipping lanes safer, right? Like, we've been dealing with these groups for months now, relentlessly, in preparation for this, which is how I look at it now based on this current information. This was all done in prep to this greater war with Iran. Okay? And we also know that Hamas, like, the whole area they were from is barely existent at this point. So this is all in preparation for the larger war, at least is what it seems like at this point in time. Iran fostered the web of armed groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and militias in Iraq, to enable them to carry out attacks on Israel and to provide Iran with allies in a region that could serve as a deterrent against Israeli attacks on Iran. After the deadly Hamas-led attacks in Israel on October 7, 2023, and Israel's devastating invasion of Gaza, many of those groups carried out their own strikes against Israel. But in the year and a half since, Israel launched audacious attacks on those militias in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. And the response from the Axis has grown increasingly muted. Hamas, which long governed in Gaza, has been degraded by more than a year of war set off by the October 2023 attack on Israel. Right? And just goes through all that stuff that we already know happened. But this is my other piece of evidence for why we are heading to war over there, which there's more. By the way, we've got more. So I want to make sure we touch on that too. But I think that's very indicative of a lot of preparation and planning for this, and it not necessarily being, something that just happened because of a recent incident, right? Like, to me, this sounds like a very strategically planned out assault that required the removal of these proxies beforehand in order to mitigate the risk of any additional collateral damage in the process. And that applies to us here in the United States as well. If these sleeper cells require these other groups to be active and well funded and well organized, and they've been decimated militarily during the last year and a half. How much organization and funding can they maintain throughout that time before acting? And then, not to mention, how much additional funding now does the Department of Homeland Security and all of our internal national security apparatuses have access to in order to eliminate those threats before they become active? Like, these are all things that I believe are starting to come into tandem. Now, here's a quick update for everybody. Pete Hegseth said he is headed to the White House Situation Room to meet with Trump and his national security team amid tensions in the Middle East. It comes as the U.S. has repositioned both warships and military aircraft in the region to respond if the conflict between Israel and Iran further escalates. Hegseth didn't provide details of what prompted the meeting, but he said on Fox News late tonight that the movements were to ensure that our people are safe. Hegseth's chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, tweeted that American forces are maintaining their defensive posture. The U.S. has helped Israel shoot down Iranian missiles. Now, keep that in mind. Defensive posture also allows additional targeting. And if we get hit by something from Iran, suddenly the justification and support for additional action exists, right? So we should be concerned about that as well. By putting these very expensive and, in some cases, antiquated military assets within striking distance of Iran, you offer the opportunity for a target that might not have otherwise existed, and then suddenly there's a reason for why we have to retaliate, because they did a thing against us directly, right? So like, that's always a concern I have. I'm not necessarily saying that something is being staged in that matter or that that's the plan, but regardless, of any nefarious planning around that idea, just having additional assets in the area increases the risk, not the risk. What English do I have today? The risk that one of those assets will be encountered in some sort of, problematic scenario. So, jumping back in the chat before we get on to my next piece of evidence, because by the way, there's two more, not even just one. We have two more things to go over to show you the fact that we're probably going to war. Like, it's just all the pieces are coming together and it's getting hard to ignore. And just to reiterate, make sure that we're on the same page. I don't want this to happen. I don't want to see another war in the Middle East. I don't want to see us involved in a war unnecessarily. I just don't think it's the right thing for us at this point in time. But I also don't get to make that decision now, do I? So, all right, back into the chat for a minute because we got great people in here tonight and I want to say hello. Cult Leader says, getting dual tubes night vision for when China turns our grid off permanently. Remember who makes our power transfer stations, people? Well, here, I'll give you a piece of advice, and this is just from my personal experience. Maybe go with a single tube, PVS 14 type situation for right now. Save that additional money to invest in other things that are more relevant to immediate survival, and then you'll still have the same level of capability even with that singular tube with, out the luxuries and comfort of having two. If that makes any sense to you, because I do have one or two, and I will tell you that I basically just run with one at this point in time for a multitude of reasons, which we'll talk about in a long-form video here in the near future, I have to assume. Let's see here. Jeffrey Kaminsky says, my sleeper cells are about to be activated with the yawn emoji. You know what, Jeffrey? I don't blame you for that because, it is tiring having to discuss these things and having to consider them, and I agree with you that it makes me tired as well. So, and then we also have Rob Sinelli, also on my WW3 bingo card, next to Nimitz sinking, Iran surprise nuke test. Yep. Well, there's a lot of things that could happen, but I think that we are in a situation where I wouldn't be surprised by any of them anymore, okay? Luke Skywatcher also chimed in with an interesting little tidbit here. Let me go ahead and show that. We need to watch for a Pearl Harbor type of moment, and I agree. However, that term has been thrown around quite a bit lately regarding all types of things, like what just happened in Russia recently with the drone strike on nuclear assets throughout the country by Ukraine. That was called, Russia's Pearl Harbor moment, and I don't think the correlation is actually there, but I understand why the press was trying to use that as a term that people are familiar with. I don't think it rises to that occasion, but at the same time, don't forget, what was that, 2 weeks ago? That Ukraine literally did like the most bombacious, crazy drone strike on nuclear assets all throughout Russia simultaneously by using concealed cargo containers on the backs of trucks and drone operators with boots on the ground to destroy these multi-million-dollar assets. Like, that just happened. And we're already past that. Like, that's old news at this point in time, which is crazy because 3 years ago, right, when all this stuff first started happening, I would have thought if that happened, then someone's going to get nuked. And now that stuff happens, and I'm like, well, I guess they won't have as many planes now. And like we have entered a crazy time period, haven't we? So, WV Prepared Mind, good to see you. Thank you for hanging out, and I appreciate you saying that the info is great. Thank you for that. What's up, MP? Greetings, brother, and thank you, says Robert Larson. Well, thank you, too. Okay, so always appreciate everybody in the chat jumping in, saying hello. I'm trying my best to interact. And then, by the way, C-Tom here says, USS Nimitz is at its end of service life. Watch out for false flag on a ship that's heading for decommission soon. So let's talk about that really quickly, because evidence piece number 4. We're on 4 now, right? Did we do 2 or whatever? I wasn't even trying to keep count. It just ended up being that way. Here we go. Another piece of evidence for you. Aircraft carrier USS Nimitz sailing to Middle East, says official. This is from today. Okay, this is from USNI. The U.S. Navy's oldest aircraft carrier is transiting the Strait of Malacca as Iran and Israel continue to exchange missile fire. USS Nimitz, CVN-68, sailed west through the Singapore Strait Monday, bound for the Indian Ocean, according to ship spotters. The carrier is sailing to the Middle East, a defense official told USNI News. The Washington-based carrier was already scheduled to sail to U.S. Central Command to eventually relieve USS Carl Vinson, which deployed in mid-November and will need to head home soon. Nimitz was operating in the South China Sea last week, according to the USNI News Fleet and Marine Tracker. As of Monday morning, Vinson is operating in the Arabian Sea with the cruiser and 3 destroyers that make up the Vinson Carrier Strike Group. Nimitz transit through the Singapore Strait comes several days after Israel struck Iran's nuclear sites to degrade Tehran's nuclear capabilities. Now, here's the thing about the Nimitz. Okay, first off, like was just recently said, yes, it's very old. It is going to be decommissioned soon, and that is weird because, like, if you did ever want to, create an incident, it would be more economical to use something that you're going to throw away soon anyway, right? So, like, that's always something to speculate upon and ponder, because we've seen things like that happen in the past now, haven't we? But the other thing to keep in mind that I think is a little bit more direct is that this creates a 2 aircraft carrier scenario in the Middle East once again. And so what, according to my knowledge, and this is just, me being a layman, but having enough research to have, learned some things and ask the right questions to people who actually know more than I do. According to my information, 2 strike groups or 2 carriers in the area means that you can now wage a war if you need to. And 3 means you're like guaranteed in a war already. So 2 is like the bare minimum to actually have kinetic engagement. And so we have that bare minimum now in place once again, which means that that threshold has been met for an actual conflict to occur. So we're at that point in time once again here in the Middle East, but with all those other pieces of evidence leading up to it as well. So now we have additional supporting evidence for us to be actively engaged in a conflict here in the Middle East very soon. And the USS Nimitz stuff related to its age and decommissioning here in the near future is also concerning. So keep that in mind. And then we're also going to talk about one more piece of the puzzle that shows the U.S. is likely heading to a war here soon, because this is a little bit more logistically oriented and a little bit more economically oriented, but it is something that I find to be, let's just say, interesting based on timing. And it is something that you could see as being a national security issue when it comes to energy infrastructure, okay? And it might be something I pay a little more attention to because of where I live, which is North Dakota. But let's talk about this really quick. Stuck out. EPA staffers alarmed as Trump administration singled out cases to kill. Okay, the Environmental Protection Agency has directed staffers to back off scrutiny of the fossil fuel industry, much to their surprise. Stunned staffers told CNN the directive came verbally in recent months as EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin and other top officials have made clear, implicitly and explicitly, that President Donald Trump wants to reduce what he sees as burdensome oil and gas industry regulations and increase production. The alarm bells began ringing just weeks into the new Trump administration, sources said, when they were asked to detail cases they were working on for review by upper management. That was not particularly unusual, but they were also asked to single out any violations involving fossil fuel. One official told the network that managers notified enforcement officials that the energy sector cases, especially in the Midwest, were being handled differently and would not likely be advanced. It stuck out to me, the source said. I was concerned if any of those cases would be resumed again. The sources said officers were stopped from issuing notices of violation or sending information requests to suspected polluters. And they said the Department of Justice's Environmental Division has pulled back its assistance as buyouts and layoffs thinned its ranks. The environmental enforcement section of the DOJ has been decimated, said one EPA employee familiar with the matter. There's no one to do the work. Now, on the surface, it just sounds like, oh, we got to boost the economy, we got to get fuel production up, we got to become energy independent, and all those catchwords that we like to hear when we're campaigning and everything else. But now, in the context of everything that's going on, and in the build-up to this current situation, is it very far-fetched to assume that these regulations are being dramatically decreased and let go of because we need that additional production to move full steam ahead in order to support a war effort and in order to prepare ourselves for, I don't know, the Strait of Hormuz to be shut down, for oil production to suddenly shut off via Iran, right? For all of this sudden spike in oil cost and pricing and everything else? I think it's reasonable to assume that there could be a correlation there for it being part of the stepping stones of preparation for this conflict. We know that a war with Iran is going to send oil prices through the roof, and we also know that we are in a situation where things are getting very dicey very quickly. So I want to go ahead and check to see if there's any additional updates or anything along those lines. Let's see here. President Emmanuel Macron says Trump made a ceasefire offer to Israel and Iran. Macron said that President Trump made an offer for a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. There's indeed an offer to meet and exchange. An offer was made especially to get a ceasefire and then to kickstart broader discussions. We have to see now whether the sides will follow. My understanding is that Netanyahu has recently said that he's not interested in a ceasefire and that he wants to accomplish his mission and deal with Iran in the way that they see fit. So that is also a high possibility, and that is something that I don't think he's lying about. I think that they don't necessarily want to deal with a ceasefire. So, Gerald says your live feed keeps getting interrupted with advertising. So there's this, they changed the advertising format on YouTube. And one thing that's interesting that I was curious about is that they're supposed to now start doing ads where like half the screen becomes an ad and then the live stream continues on the other side. And that doesn't sound like that's what's happening right now. So if that's what's happening, let me know in the chat just so I can be aware. And if not, then we'll have to make some additional changes. But YouTube's changing their advertising stuff on this platform like every other day lately. And I'm just not even sure like what it is they're trying to accomplish at this point in time. So no worries there. Two Doctors Homestead, thank you for all the videos, Magic. I think something big is about to go down. Well, I appreciate the super chat 100%. And I also agree with you. I think that there's a lot of evidence that something large is on its way. And that, unfortunately, we're getting ready for a war, and I don't necessarily want us to. So here we are, and it is what it is, you know? And then let's see here. Nick says, MP, do I still got to keep paying bills? Yeah, I think you do. I think we're all going to keep paying bills for the long term, unfortunately. I think that banks and governments around the world will figure out a way to make sure you can still pay your bills even if nothing else works. Your water could be off, the power could be off, everything could be completely shut down, and there will be some guy on a horse with a messenger bag showing up at your door every month and saying, hey, you got your mortgage, you got your electric bill, I don't have electricity. Yeah, well, you still got to pay if you want to stay connected. Oh, well, we don't have power. Yeah, but do you want me to unconnect you? Because then what if power comes back, right? Like, I have zero doubt that that kind of stuff is going to happen, and it's very unfortunate, but it's just reality of life, right? The bankers are going to figure out a way to get those banks their money. So, let's see here. Gerald says the advertising goes over the top of your feed and cuts you off. Okay, so they're not doing the thing that they said they were doing, so I don't know what's happening. Here we are, but okay, I guess I'll try to adjust that then. Great. Great reset theory still holds up, says Sherlock Homeboy. And you know what? You might be true when you say that because it's hard to argue with at this point in time, right? So, a lot happening. I'm just going to check one more time to make sure there isn't any additional updates of any things occurring that we aren't aware of right this second. Just to make sure, you know, because a lot of stuff's been going on very quickly. And, I mean, I know there's some really good guys that I follow and channels that I check. And then there's also, of course, you know, just your legacy media and stuff too, which is definitely less trustworthy, but tends to at least give out updates relatively quickly. But I'm not seeing any additional updates right this second. So keep an eye out for that Iranian attack. Yes, missiles have flown, rockets have flown, not the largest strike anyone's ever seen. So I'm waiting for that one because they specifically said they're going to do that. And if they don't ever do it, then we know that they're going to just keep talking and not actually back it up, which is, maybe beneficial for them in the sense of OPSEC, but bad for us in the sense of understanding what's going on. And besides that, if you want to support the channel, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you share this video to give people this information. And of course, if you're new here, if you hit subscribe, we're going to be having information like this come out on a regular basis to try to help keep everybody up to date. And at the same time, I just like you, so you should hang out. If you want to be part of the private live stream, it starts at 9:15 tonight. You can join by hitting the join button down below, which makes you a channel member, which gives you access to the private live stream. You just go to my channel page, click on posts, and then on the post screen, you'll see it if you're a member, how to get into that private live stream. Also, if you want to join the Subscribe Star, it's $5 a month. It's a way to donate to the channel directly while avoiding some of the additional fees inquired by YouTube, and then also gives you direct contact and everything else related to that. And it's $5 a month, and it gets you access to the private live stream as well. And that way, we can all hang out, have a good time, or not, because if you don't want to, I totally understand. And watching this is free, and it still supports what I do, which I appreciate. Liking it is free, subscribing is free, all those things are free, and all of those things are extremely appreciated. So thank you so much. If you guys need anything from me, feel free to go to my website, magicprepper.com. There's a direct contact form there and all kinds of other stuff. And no, we didn't talk about the No King stuff. We didn't talk about the Minnesota shooter. We didn't talk about some of the other things that recently occurred here domestically because, honestly, although those things were interesting and had some data that was worth analyzing, especially from a preparedness standpoint of personal security, I think that we need to kind of see what's happening right now on this major event that could occur at any moment, and then we can go back to talking about some of those more domestic issues here soon, especially if anything escalates in that department. So anything else you need from me at all, you know what to do. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper. Florida Sheepdog 1, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time.